I'm Jared Fry, General Manager of Medina TV, and I'm joined in studio today by City Council at Large Representative Bill Lamb. Glad to have you in here today.
Great to be here with you. Thank you.
Yeah, always a pleasure. We're here today to talk about the referendum that you'll see on the ballot this November. It's issue 17 that looks to either approve or not approve an ordinance passed by council regarding the deer. A yes vote would allow the culling of the deer. A no vote would allow the ordinance not to go through and not allow the culling of the deer. So Bill, we're here to talk about this a little more in depth, and what better person to bring us some history is someone that's sat on council since this kind of became to the forefront. I think we were talking before we came on air around 2011, 2012.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Until you mentioned the length of time, I don't know if it's age or what it is, but how the years go by, and you look back and you think this is an issue that we understood we needed to talk about and to look into. You're going back a decade when this started, and it was really interesting how we attended to it. I think the issue would be raised by folks occasionally. And particularly when we had ward meetings, somebody would bring up, one person, two people might bring it up. And I remember one person in particular, you knew every time you went to the ward meeting, there could be 30 people there, but we all could have pointed and said, we know he's going to raise this issue. And we would talk about the issue. And then I think we recognized there were conflicts that were occurring. And they were really pretty limited in number. So I had the opportunity to work with the Parks Director at the time, and we didn't have a mechanism, for people to specifically let us know if there was an issue, deer eating my plants or whatever, however they perceived an issue. And we didn't have a kind of a set way to respond to it in a way that would be helpful. And anybody that's paid attention to local government, and it's interesting because I've been in local government so long, and I know frequently I talk to people that pay no attention to local government, and I don't know, because you just expect if your water's on and, everything's working, your trash is picked up, it's all good. But the way we have always worked on issues is to really resolve the issue. And when I was working with the Parks Director, we understood we were trying to address this in a way that was practical and we could get a result. And it was really the Parks Director that came up with the idea that we'd have a specific reporting place, who to talk to. And if you raise the issue, we would offer to send someone out to your property and talk to you about ways to try to resolve the conflict. Be they, commercial deterrents that you could buy. One of the most effective ones I remember that we demonstrated. And when we were demonstrating it, somebody from the Parks Department actually walked in front of the hose. It's where you could have a trigger on a hose, so if the deer were coming in your garden, it would trigger and the hose would go on. It's the most effective, and there's one city employee that knew that because he accidentally walked in front of the hose and set it off, right? went home from work quite wet. And so we go back that far. That was really when we started to try to come up with it. We did it on the website, then we would improve the website so that people would be more aware of it. And at that time, I think one thing that was a bit of work to work on was simply to get people to recognize they could contact through, because it was back in 2012, 2013, right around there, contact us through the website to explain the problem, and then we could come out and help deal with it. So that was really the very, very beginning of how we work to address the issue, always with the intention of trying to make things better. Whether we saw that plant as important or not. We understood that whatever the conflict was, and in this case it was generally conflict, deer plant was most of it, was to try to address that in a practical way. Sure.
And now we are looking at, as you guys have looked at those numbers and those reports, over the past 10 years or past decade, as we just mentioned, it now is on the as a referendum, issue 17 that is now there. It's ordinance 162-22. Kind of talk us through how we got to the point of this becoming an ordinance and then now out to the voters here this November. Yeah,
sure. It's interesting because it didn't start out as a particular deer ordinance. Only in the particulars of wild animals and feeding wild animals. The original, what was turned into City Council, was to work on and develop an ordinance to be able to deal with people feeding wild animals and by feeding them directly causing a nuisance. And so as head of special legislation committee, I believe it was 3 years, and I could be corrected on that for sure, and I could be wrong on the 3 years. It could have gone back a little further. And I get a bit confused sometimes because of COVID. But so we started to deal with that, and we had numerous meetings, and lots of folks came and talked about issues that they were having, and the idea that if you didn't feed wild animals, that they wouldn't, you would have less issue with them. So we worked that through, and at some point, the administration asked us to put dogs and cats in, and that stopped the process for a while because it turns out the state doesn't allow you to put dogs and cats in because they're not wild animals, they're domestic. So that kind of paused the whole thing. And then when we restarted the meetings, it really began to be more a discussion about deer and numbers of deer, and deer's contribution to what people perceive as conflict. And so we started to work through that process. And during that, my intention was two things. One was to listen to everybody, and they were long meetings, and there was good-sized crowds, and to listen to everybody, and then try to come up with a plan, much as we had looked at when we first started talking about the deer back in 2011. Try to come up with a plan that would really impact on the issue and improve it for the people that were having a problem. And so what I was working toward was a safe, comprehensive management plan. And I used as a template for that, the Humane Society has a pretty lengthy package of how to put together that plan. What are the details of it, and how does that get you to tamp down the conflict? The idea being, we will have deer here. Regardless of anything we do, we will have deer. Setting aside for a while the other animals, about the feeding ordinance. But we will have the deer. And so as long as we have them, we will have an issue. So how best can we deal with it? And so using that as a template was my intention, so that we would implement an education program, engage the whole community, so that people, whether you were pro this or con this, we can get people together, because that's almost always where we get the best results. And so we worked through that for quite a while, and of course culling was always on the table. I mean, there was a lot of those conversations where we just need to do something. You need to cull the deer. But without having, what I felt was without having the other components of the plan, like working to try to get state approval to deal with fertility issues, because the development of new fertility drugs for deer has been quite effective in a lot of places and enabled communities to reduce the deer population by 40%. Just culling deer, because they reproduce, and there are, by the numbers, and if you look at geographically, we're surrounded by still a great deal of woodland, open space. And we are fortunate enough to have more parkland per capita than any other city in the state of Ohio. So we will have deer here. And so what I was working for in committee was to have that comprehensive plan, knowing full well it would be a lot of work, not easy to do. You have to get a lot of people together, a lot of implementing, and in the end, I think you would know then either this would work or it wouldn't work, but it would give you each of the components that could possibly have a serious impact on the different kinds of conflicts, be they accidents, deer auto truck accidents, garden accidents, and whatever else, the other issues that wild animals can cause when you're in such a dense community. That actually was voted out of committee. That would have been the proposal. It came out of committee, a 2-to-1 vote. And then we had listened to, because the Department of Natural Resources had come in and talked about culling and about a program, an urban culling program. And an urban culling program then is one that takes place in a city. So if you were in Parma, you have an urban program to cull deer. And we talked that through, but without the other components of the plan, because the plan I was looking at included culling as well. But it wasn't an urban culling. It was a controlled culling by sharpshooters in a cordoned off space. And in this case, it would have been, you would close a park, police would close a park, and you'd hire people, and sharpshooters would come in, maybe police, and they would cull a number of deer, and then you would pay to process them, and it would be an expense to the city. That was part of the Humane Society plan that came out, that I had proposed and packaged and distributed during those meetings. But we kept leaning into, and other members of council kept kind of leaning into the urban part of it. And so that went to Finance Committee, and those discussions ensued. And the more we talked about it, it became evident to me that City Council, the majority of City Council members were leaning into that plan. Because we had based a lot of it in meetings, we had talked a lot about how it was based on the North Royalton Ordinance. North Royalton's ordinance is 14 pages long because it had a lot of these rules and regulations in it, and ours ended up being about 2 pages long. And so I thought we needed to try to take some of that out to, I think, let the public know, that we had these things in place and they would feel more comfortable with what was going on. Going way back to when I was elected mayor when I was 29, I understood then that safety is a foundational responsibility of government. And when I was mayor, I was safety director. And we knew that then. I knew that then, even all those years back, that's basically why governments were formed, is to keep people safe. And that's why we invest so heavily in police departments and fire departments and the excellence of a building department to ensure all those different things that cannot be, something can go wrong. We can deal with it the best we can to try to ensure they don't go wrong. And so I felt that it was important that we add more regulations to this plan. Most people on City Council know I'm not in favor of shooting things. I don't kill spiders, and whatever weirdness that might be, that's just me. But I had proposed that we amend the ordinance to add some safety measures to it. I was concerned about things like the hunt is from 30 minutes before sunup to 30 minutes after sundown. And having been here a long time, I know how many kids are at school bus stops, different times of the day. I go out and walk my dog at night, those sorts of things. And I felt you can talk about things being safe, but when you introduce crossbows into a community that's as densely populated as ours, a mistake can happen. And I would have preferred if we were going to call as part of a comprehensive plan, and it would be in a cordoned off park, but if we were going with the urban hunt, that we would have added some safety measures to it, like limiting the hours. Notifying people if you lived next to a property where the hunt was going to be allowed to take place. Crossing off properties such as parks, open space, green space, churches, schools, which I don't think anybody would hunt there, but just to eliminate those from the ordinance so that they could never be considered. And it's important to understand, I have great faith and trust in our police chief. Same with the Parks and Recreation Director, the mayor, who he and I have a relationship that goes all the way back to 1982 when he was on the police force. It's not about them in particular, but it is that we have passed an ordinance, and some of it is based on our trust in the consideration of the people in place. Police chiefs, I believe, are retired out at a certain age now. I think they go. We're all going at some time, and I felt the ordinance needed to be more specific if this is what we were going to do, to ensure that when the next person comes into office or the next police chief is there, that they will have guidelines and rules to go by, because they may not be the same sorts of people. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating to me, though, that when you look back historically at issues like this, it's and we are an historic community. We have a great downtown, right? The Restoration. And about 120 years ago, the village of Medina passed a law that you could not fire a weapon inside the village, and they said you couldn't fire the weapon. The reason they put the law in place is you couldn't fire the weapon because the city was too populated and too dense. There were 2,700 people in the village of Medina then. And so my concerns for safety are real. It's my sense of that based on looking at other cities, urban plans. And that we are not a village anymore with 2,700 people. We are a city of 26,000 people. We are very densely populated. So while I disagree with council, as I've said before, it's nothing personal. It is all about that issue of let's be safe. And ultimately, beyond the safety, if in fact in an urban kill you're able to eliminate 75 deer, which would probably be a lot, you're still going to have about, if the city's figures are right, we'd still have about 500 deer. So my concern past safety is that all the folks that have been to the meetings, all the people that have come to talk to us about the issues that they're having, if the ordinance passes, they won't see any difference, because if you have one deer in a neighborhood, you will probably have that same issue. That's my sense of how it went, and it is interesting in a way because it started out so long ago, and it really then had turned into a feeding wild animal ordinance, and then we got to this point.
Again, I'm speaking with Bill Lamb, City Council at Large, and we're discussing the referendum you'll see on the ballot this November, issue 17, the proposed ordinance number 162-22 regarding the deer. A yes vote would allow for the culling of the deer. A no vote would send the ordinance back to council to look at other avenues and aspects of what to do with the deer issue. So one of the nice things, Bill, with this is going to the voters. You're going to get to hear from your constituents and the residents, and that's really the best way to get your guidance on what the people of Medina want.
Absolutely. It's a great thing about our system. As we get to this place, and it is, some people feel one way and some people may feel another way, but in the end, this allows everybody to go to the ballot box and vote, and whether it's this way or this way, I have always felt, if you ultimately get to an issue that is where there are two sides pretty much, different opinions, this is a great way to settle it. It's a great way for the system to work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we'll be waiting on that this November. I appreciate your time here today. And again, when you head to the ballot box this November, that will be issue 17, the proposed ordinance number 162-22. Again, a yes vote allows for the culling of the deer. A no vote cancels the ordinance and sends it back to City Council for a decision. So, Bill, thank you for your time, and we hope everyone turns out to the voters box this November.
Thank you, Jared. It's great. Thanks.